Good morning. I'm very impressed. All these people got up early Sunday morning. So what we are going to talk about today is inscriptions. What's been discovered in archaeology that can teach us and add to our knowledge and deepen our knowledge of Tanakh. Obviously, the most important inscription, right? The most important writing is the Tanakh itself. But it's always interesting to come across things that are helping us to deepen our understanding, to broaden our understanding, sometimes even to contradict a little bit our understanding of Tanakh. Come on in, there's source sheets in the back. So we're going to look at various different inscriptions. This is in no way comprehensive, but I picked things that I thought would be interesting. So you should have a source sheet. If you don't, they're on the table in the back. You're supposed to be giving your own talk, Rabbi Tarragon. So we'll start with just a very brief introduction of the alphabet, because without the alphabet, we don't have inscriptions. The alphabet is an amazing innovation. It's an amazing game changer in human history. Right? If we want to go back to the earliest beginnings of writing, and people start writing things because they have more bureaucracy, more business, more administration, legal, all kinds of reasons why you need to start writing things down instead of only oral communication. The earliest kinds of writing are more symbols of things, right? We have hieroglyphics, of course, from Egypt, which are pictures either of a word or of a sound, but they can't be understood without other symbols next to them. So you have to learn hundreds and maybe thousands of different symbols. You also have cuneiform, which you guys have seen with the funny-looking lines and arrows that you make with a stylus on clay. Also very elaborate, very difficult form of writing. When you have such a complicated form of writing that you have to memorize hundreds of symbols, naturally that means that only the elite, only people who have the time or the need to learn how to read and write are going to learn how to read and write. And that means that literacy is closed off to most of the population. And that's the situation up until around the 19th century, the 18th century, before the Common Era. And that's when you have this wild discovery, actually made by a woman named Hilda Petrie. She's an archaeologist. She's the wife of a very famous archaeologist, Sir Flinders Petrie. We're going to talk about him in a minute. And she did her own work, and she studied a place called Sarabit el-Khadem in the Sinai Desert, which was an Egyptian turquoise mine. It was a place where there were slave workers mining turquoise. And there was a temple there to the goddess Hathor. And near the temple, they found inscriptions on the wall. But the inscriptions were not really hieroglyphics. They were much more kind of crude symbols, much fewer of them. And they were able to decipher them. And they turned out to be the beginnings of letters. Right? What's a letter as opposed to a hieroglyphic? Here's the brilliant idea. Instead of a picture for every word, you have a picture for every sound. How many sounds can the human mouth make? Not that many. 22, 26, maybe 30. And that way everybody can learn how to read and write. Now, what are these inscriptions? These inscriptions are saying to the goddess, please remember your servant XYZ. And what we think is that they were written by the slaves, by the mine workers, meaning not the elite. These illiterate, very poor, and they're hoping for a better life, and they want to be remembered to the goddess. And they come up with their own kind of writing that they're able to learn. Now, because they are the lowest rung of society, this doesn't spread very quickly. It kind of stays underground. And while the Egyptians are in power, hieroglyphics are what's out there, but this kind of stays underground. And a few centuries later, when the Egyptians are not as powerful as they were, around the 13th century, and who becomes more powerful? The Canaanites, the Phoenicians. This emerges, This emerges and becomes an alphabet that sweeps the whole world. And every alphabet that we have today essentially comes from this alphabet. Now, what is it? I brought you just to do it very briefly, to take a look at it. That's what you have at the top of the source sheet here. The idea is to have a symbol for each sound. Now, there are different variations. We're going to see the alphabet was not formed so completely. It took a good few centuries to have a very standardized alphabet. But this is the beginnings of what we call Ktav Ivri Atik, right? The ancient Hebrew writing. It is not the way we write Hebrew today, as you can easily see. we write in what's called Ktav Ashuri, which the Gemara is already very aware of this distinction. They talk about how when Ezra comes from Bavel, he brings the Ktav Ashuri, the writing changes. And we know that from archaeology. Everything that's Bayit Rishon or earlier is written in the old letters. Most of, not completely, but most of Bayit Sheni is written in the new letters, in the letters that we read today. If you see Bayit Sheni inscriptions, you have no problem reading them. Okay? They look like the letters we use today. Now you take each sound and you make a picture. There are source sheets in the back. Right? You make a picture based on something that starts with that sound. So just to do a few very easy examples. Okay, take a look at ayin. What's ayin? An eye, right? Pei is a peh. Shin, you want to know what shin is? Tooth, exactly, shinayim. Okay, how about mem? Mem is flowing mayim, exactly. Nun is a nachash. Okay, bet is more like a box. It's supposed to be a house, right? A bite. Dalit is a dog. Some of them look a little better than others. Okay, kaf. What's a kaf? Kaf is a kafayad, right? Your palm. That's what all of these different ones are. And as time passes, they become more and more abstract. Very interesting one. What's an aleph? Okay, aleph is a bull. Bull, sure. Why? An ayil maybe? No. An aluf. Okay, aluf today means a general or a champion, but in Tanakh language, an aluf is a bull, and that's what it is. And all these letters eventually become more abstract and evolve into, and some of them it's very easy to see, right? The A really, the aleph turns into an A, right? Very nicely. The taf turns into a T, right? And that's the beginnings of letters, and that really changes. It makes it possible for everybody to learn how to read and write, and that's going to be very important. So that's just to give us a little bit of background on letters. The next
What language that you found? What was it?
What do we
it?
call it? I guess we would call it Proto Canaanite, meaning it's not yet Hebrew. Now, here's the tricky thing, and it's a good question. Is every time we see these letters, is this Hebrew? No, okay? Just like every time you see English letters, Latin letters, it's not English. It could be French, it could be Spanish, right? It could be Italian. Everybody's using this script in our region. So you might find this script, but it's not a Hebrew inscription, and that's going to be something that we'll talk about a little later. Okay. What?
Wasn't Ugaritic an alphabet?
This is the first one, and the Phoenicians are the ones that kind of really spread it. But Ugaritic, no, they're using the stylus and the cuneiform.
They're using the stylus, but they didn't have an alphabet.
They didn't have an alphabet. They have the lines and the letters and the arrows. Okay, and once you have an alphabet, you have much more of an option to really express yourself. Okay, we're going to go back to hieroglyphics for a minute, and that's the first source you see here. And this is Hilda's husband. Usually we say Flinder's wife, but here we're going to say Hilda's husband. Okay, and this is a very significant discovery of an inscription. It's the very first time we hear a mention of the people of Israel outside of Tanakh. Okay, in Tanakh, obviously. But outside of Tanakh, the first time we hear about Am Yisrael is in this inscription. It's discovered in Egypt at the end of the 19th century. A stela. A stela is a very large, monumental stone that kings would write, right? It's the early version of Twitter. Kings would write all their accomplishments and what they did and how great they are. This is a stela written by Paro Merneptah. And Paro Merneptah is writing, and I conquered this one, and I attacked this one, etc., etc. And among that list, Israel is laid waste, its seed is not. It's the first time we hear about Israel. Which one is Israel? That first grouping of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we are ending with the bird, little characters, okay? Those are the consonants, the syllables that spell out something very close to Israel. Isiriar, okay? Isiriar. Now, how do we know that's not a person, that it's actually a nation? That's the next section. Got a nice little bent stick there. Okay, that means a group of foreigners, maybe nomadic, right? They're walking with their sticks. And the next one next to it, you have a man, you have a woman, right? The man there, the woman underneath. And the three little lines mean plural, okay? So you have people, the people of Israel. The irony, of course, is that the first time we mention Israel, we are already off the map, right? Israel is laid waste. Nice joke on you, Paro Merneptah. We're still here, okay? But this is the first time that we really hear about Am Yisrael in an outside source, and that's an exciting thing. We're going to do one more thing about alphabets. If you go to the next page, There have been a number of inscriptions discovered in Israel that show an ancient alphabet, okay, that are some kind of a writing exercise. Okay, this is one of the older ones. This was discovered in the 1970s in a place called Izbit Sarta. Izbit Sarta, the Hebrew name for it is Even HaEzer. And if you know your Sefer Shmuel, you know that Even HaEzer is the place where there's a very important battle between Am Yisrael and the Plishtim. It's an Israelite city. That's where Am Yisrael is encamped. Today it's near the town of Rosh Ha'ain. It's actually right on the edge of Rosh Ha'ain, in the center of Israel. And this is the battle where Am Yisrael, for better or worse, brings the Aron to the battlefield. It's captured by the Plishtim. It's taken away, right? The whole saga of the Aron. But this is an Israelite town, and in this town they found this inscription. Now, what is it? Okay, we can recognize some of the letters. They look kind of very old-fashioned, okay, and this is not so standardized. The first 4 lines, we can read the letters, but we don't know what they say. Okay. The last line, we do know what it says, and it's an alphabet. Now, take a look. Do you recognize any of the letters? You can refer back to the chart. Anything tell you where's the aleph, where's the taf? All right, the taf is pretty easy. The taf is all the way on the right, okay? You see that? That X? The X is a taf, okay? Then the opposite end of the line, that's an aleph, and this is an alphabet. Now, you could say, but it's Hebrew. Right? Why is it going from left to right? Here's one of the very difficult things about being someone who can interpret ancient inscriptions. Okay? In the very beginning days of writing, as writing becomes more widespread, not only are letters not standardized, but the way you write is not standardized. And you can write from left to right, and you can write from right to left, and you can write up and down. And my favorite one, you can write something that scholars call boustrophédon, which means as the ox plows. I write like this. Right? Right, left, right. How do you possibly interpret that? So it makes it very complicated and very hard. And this tells us, among other factors, this is a very old alphabet. Now, why would you have an alphabet written down? What would this be? Why would you find this somewhere? What do you think? Yeah?
3rd graders trying to do alphabetical order.
Beautiful. It's somebody's homework. And he forgot to bring it to school. And archaeologists found it. The dog did not eat my homework. The archaeologist found my homework. Okay. Now, that's a beautiful thing, because what that means is that 3rd grader, 8th grader, somebody's learning how to read and write in a little town, not a royal town, not a administrative town, just your basic, town in Israel. Somebody's learning how to read and write, and that gives you a clue that literacy is pretty widespread, and that's a fascinating and important idea. Yeah.
What percentage would you say in the First Temple and Second Temple?
This is, first of all, First Temple. Second Temple already even more widespread, I would say. I could not possibly give you a percentage, but I can give you a couple of proofs that there are a lot of people learning how to read and write. Okay, one is from Tanakh, and it's a great proof. In the book of Shoftim, okay, here's Gidon, right? Gidon chasing the Midyanim, if you remember the story, right? He chases the Midyanim, they cross the Yarden, he's chasing after them in hot pursuit, and his army is exhausted. They don't have any food, they don't have any water, and he stops at an Israelite town, and he says, listen, we're on our way to catch these generals. Could you give us provisions? And they say, we don't see any generals. When you have the generals, come back and we'll give you stuff. And Gidon says, you're going to be sorry you said that. And he chases them, he captures them, he comes back on his way back, and on his way back, anybody remember what happens? All right. He pulls a kid off the street, and he says, write down for me the names of the zikenim, of the elders of the town, so that I know who to round up and who to punish. Right? The kid on the street knows how to read and write. Stam a kid in the middle of nowhere. Okay? Archaeologically, we have another great proof besides these. Okay? In the fortress of Tel Arad in the south, you know where Arad is, in the south of Israel. This is one of the border fortresses in Bayit Rishon times. Already a long time ago, like 40 years ago, it discovered a bunch of pieces of pottery, a straka, right, the scrap paper of ancient times, with all kinds of instructions and letters and what does the commander need to do and what supplies do they need. Very nice, very exciting, except that they were recently re-examined. And the students who re-examined them realized that each one of these pieces of pottery with writing has a different handwriting. Okay? Meaning it's not one person writing this stuff. This soldier wrote one thing, and This is a remote outpost, and the soldiers know how to read and write. Okay, and we'll come back to that later with the Shiloh inscriptions. I can't give you a percentage answer, but we definitely have proof that a lot of people are reading and writing. Now, the last thing that's here that's fascinating is what you see in the circle. Okay, and I realize it's a little hard to read, but the letter that's all the way on the right of the circle is a little circle. Remember what the circle is? The ayin. Okay, right before the ayin, to the left of it, is a pei. Okay, do the alphabet in your head for a minute. Which comes first, pei or ayin? Okay, I also forget. Okay, ayin comes before pei, but here pei comes before ayin, and we see this in another ancient alphabet as well. Okay, take a look a little bit further to the left. One of the easier letters to figure out is the one that looks a little bit like a figure eight. The two boxes, one on top of the other. Okay, everybody see that? That's the letter chet. If you count, letter chet should be letter number 8, but it is actually letter number 7. So zayin and chet are also flipped around. It seems like the alphabet had a different order. Now, I can show you that not just from archaeology, but from Tanakh. We have places in Tanakh that are alphabetic acrostics, right? Think of Ashrei, other things in Tehillim. One of the very prominent ones is most of the book of Eicha. Okay, in the book of Eicha, take a look underneath. Pei comes before ayin. Patzu alayich piyim kol oivayich, that's pasuk tet zayin, pasuk yud zayin, asa Hashem asher zamam. Okay, pei comes before ayin, and not only in Perek Bet, but in other prakim as well. Chazal are very puzzled by this, because they know that ayin comes before pei, and they ask the question, Patzu alayich piyim, amar Rava, amar Rabbi Yochanan, bishvil ma yikdim tei la'ayin, right? Bishvil amiraglim shamru b'pihem ma shelo ra'u be'einehem. Right? A very nice message. Don't talk before you see the truth, before you know the reality. It's a very beautiful homiletic message, but it's not the reason that the pei comes before the ayin. Okay? The reason that the pei comes before the ayin is because just like the letters weren't written the same all the time, and just like the order wasn't standardized, the order of the letters wasn't standardized either. And at a certain point, ayin comes before pei, but this is an earlier version, and Eicha is going back to that earlier version. So we might think the alphabet always was the same. Not necessarily, not according to what we see here. Okay, we're going to leave the alphabet, and we are going to go to inscriptions that help us to identify places. Okay? There are places in Eretz Israel that never lost their identity. Nobody ever questions where's Yerushalayim, where's Hebron. Right? People always lived there. The name was retained. It wasn't a problem. There are other places that we were fortunate when the Arabs conquered the land of Israel in the 7th century. They didn't bother to change the names. They gave the pronunciation a little bit of a twist. They changed it a little bit. Right? Beit El becomes Bitin. Tzipori becomes Safuria. But it's enough of a similarity, of a resemblance, that we can figure out where it is. But there are other places that we lost their location. We know they existed. We know more or less where they were, but we don't know exactly where they are. And if you can have an inscription, right, the highway sign that says, welcome to, that's really great. That doesn't happen very often. Okay? But it did happen in Ekron. But there's a story that precedes the discovery, which is an even better story. Okay? And this brings us a little Yom Ha'atsmaut. Okay? A little Yom HaZikaron, really. On the 4th day of Iyar in 1948, Gush Etzion, May 13th, 1948, Gush Etzion falls to the Jordanians, a terrible massacre. The 4 kibbutzim of Gush Etzion are no longer, but within a year, 3 of those kibbutzim are rebuilt to the west, close to Ashdod, Ein Surim, Masuot Yitzchak, and Rivadim. They're still around today. And Rivadim, which was the only secular kibbutz, the Shomer HaTzair kibbutz, is rebuilt. One of the members of kibbutz Rivadim, his name was Natan Idlin, was, like many Israelis of the time, an amateur archaeologist. And he would wander around the kibbutz. And right outside the kibbutz was a very large tell, very large archaeological site. And he looked around and he was trying to figure out what it is. He realized it was Philistine, it was Plishti, because the pottery was very distinct with the birds' heads, the images. It was a clearly Plishti site. And he said, what could it be, right? We have 5 Plishti cities. Ashkelon, Ashdod, Aza, we always knew where they were. They're on the coast, they never got lost. 2 others, Ekron and Gat, where are they? They're somewhere inland, we don't know exactly where they are. And he says, which one could it be? And then he opens up his Tanakh. And I always love telling the story because here's the secular guy but knows his Tanakh backwards and forwards better than all of us in this room, right? And he opens up his Tanakh and he sees the same story we referred to earlier, the story of Sefer Shmuel Aleph, where the Aron is taken into captivity by the Plishtim. And if you remember the story, they bring it home with them in triumph and bad stuff starts happening, right? The god falls over, they all get stricken, mites, blah, 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 blah. Each city says, we had it long enough. We're going to pass it on to you guys, the next one. Okay? The final city where the Aron is Ekron. And in Ekron they say, enough, we're sending this back. We've had enough. We don't want this thing anymore. But we want to know, was this the hand of God doing these things to us? Or was it a coincidence? Right? And if you remember the story, they build a wagon. They attach 2 cows without a driver, and they say, go. And they say, if the cows go to the nearest Israelite city by themselves, then clearly this is Yad Hashem. And lo and behold, of course, the cows go directly to Beit Shemesh, right? The nearest Israelite city, all by themselves. Natan Idlin looks up from the tel that he's standing on, Tel Mikneh, right outside Rivadim. And what does he see directly east? Beit Shemesh. Right? It's Beit Shemesh. And he says, this must be Ekron. This has to be Ekron. Logically, based on the topography, based on the story, this must be Ekron. This is in the 1950s. Takes close to 50 years for him to be proven right. Okay? In the late 90s, on the site, when they did excavations there, they discovered an inscription on stone which said, not in this language, but translated what you see here. The temple which he built, Achish, son of Padi, son of Yair, ruler of Ekron. This is the welcome to Ekron sign. And it was discovered through logic and through knowledge of Tanakh, but we have a proof of it here. So that's a beautiful example. We have other places where occasionally you will find name signs of places like Gezer or Givon. Doesn't happen so often, but does happen occasionally. So that's one of my favorite ones. David HaMelech. People who came when I spoke here a year or so ago, we talked a lot about David and the authenticity of David and the power of David and how do we know about David, and the trend in archaeology in the 80s and 90s to say that David and Shlomo are mythical figures that are written much later back into Tanakh, and that was a trend for a while. That trend was brought to a stop, not completely, but the idea of saying that there was no David by the discovery of the inscription that you see right here. Okay, this is an inscription, again, part of one of those big monumental stelas. This one was discovered in Tel Dan, in the far north, right near Kiryat Shmona. A lot of people may have been there, very beautiful national park, but with an ancient city there. And this is an inscription that was written in our Hebrew letters that you see, but this is an example of other people using these letters. This is the King of Aram. Okay, the King of Aram, one of the major enemies of Israel in the time period of Achav and later on. And he's writing on his stela who he defeated. And he writes that he defeated the kings of the house of Israel, and he defeated the king of Beit David, the house of David. And that's what you see in the white outline here. The only thing that's really clear to see are the dalids, are the deltas, right? The triangles. Beit David. This is dated to the 9th century, and we all tend to date David HaMelech, we date him to the 10th century, right, 100 years earlier. If you have an inscription 100 years later talking about the dynasty, the house of David, there was a David, right? There has to have been a David. And this discovery by Avraham Biram, Professor Avraham Biram, basically put to rest that idea that there is no historical David. Was David as powerful as Tanakh says he was? That's a different lecture. Okay, but this tells us that David is around. So that's a very significant inscription. Okay, we're going to talk a little about seals and seal impressions. Okay, in the old days, I want to communicate. I'm an important person. I want to send a letter. Okay, what do? There's no mail. There's no email. There's no nothing. Okay, I write my letter. I roll it up. I give it to a messenger who takes it out to the field, to wherever I want it to go. But what if the messenger gets curious on the way, or somebody else wants to see the contents of this letter, certainly if I'm an important person. So the messenger will just open it up. Okay, I solved that problem. I take a little piece of clay, I seal my letter closed, and nobody can read it. The messenger's a little smarter than me. He knows that all along the way he'll find mud, he'll replace the clay, big deal. So what did everybody do? And this is everybody, anybody who was important, has a ring or a necklace with something that identifies it as his. Okay, we're going to see names here, but in the rest of the ancient Near East, they had much more fabulous things with beautiful pictures and all kinds of seals. But this is what we call the Tabat HaMelech, or the Tabat of anybody important, right? Your seal, this is essentially your signature. You take your ring, you push it into the wet clay, and that's much, much harder to replace. And that way you can ensure that your document gets where it needs to go without being tampered with. Right? And we see that in Tanakh, who handing over this signet ring transfers power, right? Most obviously, the story that everybody remembers. Purim, Achashverosh, right? Achashverosh gives his ring to Haman, and he gives it to Mordechai. Other story, less well remembered. Who else hands over his ring to transfer power? Yehuda uses his ring, that's true, as a guarantee. That is very important, his ring and his staff. But we also have a transfer of power. That's just a transfer of, like an eravon, collateral. Paro and Yosef, right? When Yosef comes to power, Paro doesn't just give him an outfit and a wife. He also gives him the Tabat HaMelech. The Tabat HaMelech shows your power. So anybody who's anybody has a signet ring. By the way, some of them have been found belonging to women. Not a lot, but some. Okay, which is fascinating, right? That there was a woman who was powerful enough, probably not in the government, but maybe in business, that she would need to have her own signet ring. So, for example, in Yerushalayim, they found one, somebody named Elihana Bat Gaal. Was she running her father's business, her husband's? Well, we don't know. But she was important enough that she had her own ring. Now, you can find two different things. You can find seals, the actual thing. You can find what are called boule, seal impressions, the pieces of clay with the stamp in it. Okay? Obviously, you're going to find a lot more impressions, right? One ring can make hundreds, maybe thousands of impressions. Why are you going to find it intact and not broken open? Because it might have been put in an archive, right, and just kept sealed. And we found many, many, many seal impressions. This began to multiply as people began to spread out more bureaucracy, more administration, more business, more literacy, and you have more of these. Now, when you find them, it can tell you fascinating things about society. First of all, that you could have a woman who could have one, right? Some of them have job titles, job descriptions, right? Na'ar, right? Somebody who's the na'ar of the king or of somebody else. Asher al-Habayit, the Secretary of State, basically. The Sar Tzava, all different kinds of job descriptions that tell you a little bit about the structure of society. And occasionally we find people whose names we recognize. And that's what you have up here on top. Okay? This was a seal impression that was discovered in the city of David, in Ir David, in the 1980s. Okay? Late 70s, early 80s by Yigal Shiloh, where he found a whole huge cache, 51 boule, right? Seal impressions, 49 of them easy to read. Okay? Most of them not names that we know, although Tanakh-ish names. But this one says, Gemariyahu ben Shaphan. Gemariyahu ben Shaphan, if you know your Yirmiyahu, Gemariyahu ben Shaphan is the scribe to King Yehoiakim. King Yehoiakim, one of the last kings of Malchut Yehuda before the destruction of the first temple. Not a good king. Gemariyahu and the rest of the Shaphan family, or almost all the Shaphan family, are good. Okay, they're allies with Yirmiyahu. Gedaliah, the governor, Gedaliah ben Achikam ben Shaphan. Okay, he is Gemariyahu's nephew. We have good reports about most of the Shaphan family. So Gemariyahu is a scribe at the time of Yirmiyahu, very close to the same area, but a few decades later, Elat Mazar found other boule from the same time period. Okay, Gedaliah ben Pashhur, Yehochal ben Shlemiyah, also people mentioned in the book of Yirmiyahu, less famous than Gemariyahu ben Shaphan and not good. Okay, but Gemariyahu ben Shaphan is very exciting to find his seal. Just very briefly, he's mentioned in a very significant story in Sefer Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu is not a popular guy. He says things that people don't want to hear, that the Beit HaMikdash is going to be destroyed, that the Babylonians are going to come and capture everyone, and he has to go into hiding. Nobody wants to hear what he has to say. So he writes down his prophecies, and he gives them to his scribe, Baruch ben Neriah, who brings them and reads them to the people. And One time that he does this, he reads a particularly disturbing prophecy, right? Some of the commentators think it's the one where he talks about the Beit HaMikdash being destroyed. Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Hema. And the son of Gemariyahu ben Shaphan, Michaiah ben Gemariyahu, hears this, and he's very upset. Well, what does this mean? The temple's going to be destroyed. And he runs to the cabinet meeting where all the officials are sitting, including his father, and he says, you guys got to hear this. This is terrible. And they bring Baruch ben Neriah, who reads them the prophecies. They're also very disturbed. And they say, listen, give us the scroll. You go into hiding, and we're going to bring this to the king. And we'll see what the king will do. And they bring it to the king. And in the book of Yirmiyahu, there's a seemingly irrelevant detail. It says that it's the 9th month. If you're counting your months from Nisan, the 9th month is Kislev. Okay? It's the winter time, and the king is sitting in his winter palace, and the fireplace is burning in front of him. But why do we care? We're going to see in a minute. Okay? And they start to read out these terrible prophecies, and Yehoiakim says, let me see that one a little closer, tear it off, cut it off, gives it to him, throws it in the fire. Next one, throws it in the fire, right? Complete disregard for the word of God, and showing, the reason why the prophecies come true, because nobody is interested in hearing them. But that's Gemariyahu ben Shaphan. And we found other bule. One that was just found recently that has been a lot out in the world of biblical archaeology is the one that you see right underneath. It has 3 lines. Okay, the top line is cut off, but it's some sort of a picture. The middle line is pretty clear, and the third line also does not necessarily complete. But the middle line says very nicely, very clearly, Li Yishaya. Li Yishaya, exactly as it says it to the right. The third line says Nun Vet Yud. I left out the Yud, sorry. Li Yishaya Navi. Could it be? Is it? Really? Right? Is it Yeshayahu's seal? And everybody was very excited. This was discovered in the Ophel, in the excavations near the southern wall, near the Kotel. In the same place that we're going to see, there was an impression, a seal impression of Chizkiyahu was discovered in the same place, same time period. Could it be Yeshayahu? Right? And there are people on both sides. The weight of scholarly evidence basically is saying right now, we would like to say yes, but no. Okay? Why not? First of all, Yeshayahu doesn't seem like the guy who would write his, Navi status on a seal. And it's not a job description, right? Lo Navi Anochi velo ben Navi Anochi. It's not something that you write on your business card, Yeshayahu Navi, right? And if you were going to write that, you would write with a Hey Yediyah. You would write Hanavi. So the whole way of writing is not a classic way of describing yourself. Usually a seal will have your name, your father's name, maybe some other occupation. Navi, not so much. Okay, a different suggestion, which is a fascinating suggestion, is that he is Yeshayahu from Nov, right? Like an Ephrati, a Beit Lachmi, a Navi, somebody from Nov. Yeshayahu talks about Nov, right? Od Hayom B'Nov Ya'amod. He talks about Sancheriv advancing on Yerushalayim and being stopped. So that's a very fascinating idea. No proof either way. Wait and see. Okay, but that's Boule, and we're going to come back to another one, and there are a lot of interesting facts you can glean from them. Number 7 is a weird example. It's a very strange example. The story of Uzziah. Right? Uzziah is a very successful king of Yehudah. He's in the time of the Navi Amos. He is responsible for expanding the borders of Israel. The economy is good. The security is good. Everything's good. He's a good king. He's a very successful king. And the story is told both in Sefer Melachim and enlarged on in Divrei Yamim that he falls to the sin of hubris. He's very powerful. He's very successful. And he believes that he can take it one step further, and he goes into the Beit HaMikdash, and he starts to go to the Mizbeach to be, in charge of the sacrifices. And the Kohanim say, no, Uzziah, that's not your job, right? You're the king, you're not the Kohen. And he ignores them, and what happens immediately, what's the consequence? He is stricken by tzarat. Tzarat breaks out on his forehead, and he has to be removed, and he's removed from being king. He doesn't die, but he's not king any further. His son becomes the acting king for the rest of his life. And here you have in Divrei Yamim what happens when he dies. This is at the bottom of the 3rd page. Vayishkav Uzziyahu im avotav, vayikberu oto im avotav b'sdei hakvura asher lamlachim, ki amru mitzorahu, vayimloch yotam b'no tachtav. Meaning, He's buried in proximity to where all the kings are buried, but it seems somewhere else. Because why else would we say Ki Amru Mitzorahu? Right? Now, that's a great story. It kind of leaves open where that burial place is. We don't really know all the details about the burial places of the kings of Yehuda. But here's something that's going to change and add to the mystery. Look at the inscription right underneath. Okay, the first thing you should notice about it are the letters. Are the letters are Ketav Ivri that we've been looking at all along? No, right? They're very nice letters that we can read very nicely, right? Very easily. It's actually Aramaic and not Hebrew, but the letters are very clear. They look very modern. And this inscription was discovered in the 1930s by Professor Eliezer Sukenik, not in an archaeological excavation. It was in a monastery, a Russian monastery near the Old City. And somebody brought it to his attention and he went to go see it. Now, that's a big problem. This inscription doesn't come from the Russian monastery. Somebody found it somewhere and brought it home, a treasure hunter. That's what we call, archaeologists call something that's unprovenanced. We don't know where it came from. Unprovenanced artifacts are a big problem because you want to find something in context, where it belongs, the time period that it belongs in. And if you don't know, if you just find it in a vacuum, that doesn't tell you all that much. But it's a fascinating inscription, right? What does it say? It says in Aramaic, Lecha hatit tame Uzziah melech Yehuda velo lemiftach. To this place were brought the bones of Uzziah, the king of Yehuda. Do not open. Brought by who? Brought when? Brought where? What was the reason behind it? We don't know. Okay? We don't know. It's just there as a mystery. But sometime in Second Temple times, hundreds of years after Uzziah dies, because this is clearly much later writing, somebody moves his bones. Why, what, who, where? Maybe one day we'll find the answer to the mystery. But meanwhile, it's just a fascinating little kind of footnote to the story that we told before of Uzziah. Okay, we come to everybody's favorite topic. It's April 15th today. Taxes. Okay? Taxes are always good. Okay? In the old days, how do you tax? You don't write a check to the IRS. Okay, you have two kinds of taxes. You have something called mas oved. The king's official comes to your town. He says, I need 25 able-bodied young men to come work in the Mikdash for a month. Give them to me. Right? That's something that we hear about. But you also have mas rechush. You have stuff that the king's supervisor comes to the town and says, you had a good year with the wine, I see. You have 100 barrels. 10 of them go to the king. And that's what we're going to talk about. How does the tax assessor then ensure that the stuff actually gets to the king? He's not bringing it home with him. Somebody's going to come around later with the truck to pick up the stuff. So here's what they did. Okay, they would take mass-produced jugs that have on their handles a seal that indicates that this stuff is meant to go to the king. And you leave those jugs, that certain number, it has to be filled up. And those handles are given some kind of indication. Okay, the most famous one is what you see in front of you. On the top of the winged scarab here, it says Lamelech, for the king. Okay? Underneath it often says a place name. Lamelech handles are this way of distributing the barrels in order to get the taxes back. Lamelech handles, we found so far about 2,000 of them around Israel. The biggest concentration is in a city that was incredibly important in the time of Chizkiyahu, much less significant today. It's a place called Lachish. Okay, Lachish is a little bit west of Beit Shemesh, going towards the coast. Today it's a nice, quiet little moshav where they grow grapes. But right outside it is this massive tell, this massive ancient city. I'm going to talk about it with Chizkiyahu in a minute. And more than 450 Lamelech handles were found there. The very important detail is that these handles were found directly underneath, a layer of destruction. Okay? The Assyrians, the next thing we're going to talk about, the Assyrians conquer the kingdom of Yisrael in the north, come to Yehuda, Chizkiyahu rebels, they attack Lachish, they conquer Lachish and destroy it. These handles are found under that layer of destruction, meaning we can date these handles to the time of Chizkiyahu. Right? Chizkiyahu, these handles are found in Lachish, in Yerushalayim, in Ramat Rachel, which today is part of Yerushalayim, but then was not. And it tells us that Chizkiyahu, besides being a righteous king, who gets rid of idols, is also a king who is very good at administration. We have one little, almost like a throwaway pasuk in Divrei Yamim that talks about how Chizkiyahu takes care of the Kohanim and the Leviim, and he makes sure that they have enough to eat and that the Bedek Habayit and everything is taken care of. But here, we actually see it. We see it in practice, right? There's a tax collection system going on all across the country. And that brings us to Chizkiyahu. If in earlier time periods, let's say the time of David or even earlier than that, we have very little outside evidence, outside of Tanakh, to tell us about the stories. By the time we get to the late Bayit Rishon, right, to the time of Chizkiyahu, 700s, you have a lot more outside evidence. And we have a lot of stories about Chizkiyahu, but the main story that we have archaeological evidence for is the story of Chizkiyahu's rebellion against the Assyrians, against the Assyrians. What's the background to the story? The Assyrians, very, very powerful, very ruthless empire, conquering all over the place. First, they conquered northern Israel. Right? We have the very terrible conquest of the whole area of Israel, the exile of the 10 tribes, bringing in of the new people, what we call the Shomronim. Okay, that story is a separate story, very important, but not one we're going to tell here. But then Sancheriv, the king of Ashur, continues south, and he comes to Malchut Yehuda. And in the beginning, he says, okay, I'm not going to kick you out. You'll pay taxes. And Chizkiyahu pays taxes. After a few years, Chizkiyahu says to himself, you know what? I'm a righteous king. I do everything that God wants. And I know that God is on my side. God doesn't need numbers. So it doesn't matter that I'm this teeny tiny little country, right? That's the size of Brooklyn, basically. Right? And this is the Assyrian Empire. I can rebel against the Assyrian Empire because God is on my side. And that's what he does. Is this a good choice? That's a different question. Okay, but that's what he does. Now, he doesn't do it without some preparations, and some of those preparations have been found in archaeology. Right? One of the things he does, and that's what you have here in Divrei Yamim, Vayikbetzu Amrav, Vayistemu et kol ha'mayanot v'et hanachal hashotef b'toch ha'aretz. Lemor lama yavo malchei Ashur umatzu mayim rabim. What is this? This is what we call the digging of Nikvat Chizkiyahu, of Nikvat HaShiloach. Taking the water of the Gihon, which is the main water source for Jerusalem, outside the walls, bringing it through a tunnel further inside the walls. And this is written about in Tanakh. He also fortifies the walls of the city. If you've been in Yerushalayim, you've seen the broad wall in the Jewish quarter. And he prepares for war. Now we'll come back to the Shiloach in a moment. But what happens? Along come the Assyrians. They besiege the city. The Assyrians, we know this from their texts as well as ours, engage in psychological warfare. They speak directly to the people, and they say to them, there's no way that your God is going to possibly be able to save you. Our God is much greater. You should just give up now. And Chizkiyahu and all the people are terrified. And he goes to Yeshayahu the Navi, and he says, what should we do? And Yeshayahu says, don't worry. And that's what you have here, Malachim Bet Yutet. Lachen kol mar Hashem al melech Ashur, lo yavo al ha'ir hazot, velo yoresh sham chetz, velo yaktimenu magen, velo yishpoch alea solela, b'derech asher yavo ba yashuv el ha'ir hazot lo yavo ne'um Hashem. V'ganoti el ha'ir hazot lehoshia lema'ani u'leman David avdi. Right? So Yeshayahu says, don't worry. God's going to protect the city. Nobody is going to say that God is less powerful than the Assyrian kings. And then what happens? ויהי בלילה ההוא ויצא מלאך השם ויח במחנה אשור 185,000 וישכימו בבוקר והנה כולם פגרים מתים. Overnight, the Assyrian army drops dead. And there is no more Assyrian army. Now, that's the story the Tanakh tells us. But in archaeology, we have two proofs that this is really what happened. Number one, the city of Yerushalayim is not destroyed in that time period. There's no destruction layer. The city continues and continues until the Churban. So nothing is destroyed. The other thing that's fascinating is another list of exploits, right? Kings always like to write about their successes, and Sancheriv is no exception. And he writes his on, it's called a prism. It's this tiny little octagonal piece of stone where he writes in tiny little letters what he did. And he writes, I conquered this one and that one. And when he gets to Chizkiyahu, and Hezekiah, the king of Judah, I shut up like a bird in a cage. What does that mean? He doesn't say I conquered him. He doesn't say I destroyed his city. He says I besieged him. The siege was really good. Don't ask me about the war. It's spin. It's basically saying the siege went well, and that's it. And if he had done more, he would have told us more. Now, two other fascinating little archaeological details. Well, just one about this. Okay, Yeshayahu, when he writes about the story, and that's the source right underneath, does he know about what Sancheriv writes? We don't know, but he uses the same imagery, but in an opposite way. Kitziporim afot ken yagen Hashem tzvakot al Yerushalayim ganon veitzil pasach b'him lid. We were saved like birds flying out of the cage. Right? We didn't get stuck in the cage. I can't prove to you that Yeshayahu knew what he wrote, but it is a beautiful contrast in imagery. I put him in the cage, I'm flying away from the cage. Nikvata Shiloach. Everybody knew that it existed, but about 100 years ago, there was an Arab kid playing around in Ir David, in the city of David, down below, goes into the tunnel, and he discovers on the wall an inscription, which if you want to see it today, you have to go to Istanbul. The Turks took it home with them. And it's what you see below here in the ancient Hebrew writing, but the translation of it is to the right. And what is it? It says like this. Tama hanikiva, the digging is finished, the tunneling is finished. V'zeh hayad dvar hanikiva, this is how we dug the tunnels. Ba'od minifim achotzvim et hagarzen ish are'ehu, u'ba'od shalosh amot lehinakev nishma kol ish korei el re'ehu. How do you dig a tunnel very quickly? You start from two ends with two groups of diggers. And he says, as they are digging, and there's only 3 amot between them, right? An amah is about 1.5 feet. It always gives me goosebumps when you read that. One of the groups put down their tools, and suddenly they hear, hey, are you close? Do you hear us? And they meet in the middle. And then it describes how the water goes through, it flows from one end to another. Now, this is an amazing inscription, right, for 2 reasons. Number one, it tells us how the tunnel was dug, which we don't have so much about technology in ancient times. But that's not what's really amazing about it. What's really amazing about it is it doesn't have the name of anybody. Not the king, not the Asher al-Habayit, not the foreman of the workers, nobody's name. Which leads us to believe that this is written by a worker, by a regular guy. Now, think about that for a second. This is a terrible job. You don't want this job. It's extremely dangerous, right? Tunneling underneath the ground. Who has this job? Slaves, very, very low-paid workers. One of them knows how to read and write. At least one of them knows how to read and write and thinks it's important enough to write such a thing. And that tells us a parallel idea to what Chazal tell us. What do Chazal say about the time of Chizkiyahu? That in the time of Chizkiyahu, even the children, everybody knows the laws of Tum'ah and Tahara. There's universal education. And that's an amazing thing you don't even have today in many parts of the world. And you have it in the time of Chizkiyahu 2,700 years ago. The other very nice thing is the bula that I promised you on the bottom here. This was discovered also in the Ophel, also near the southern wall. And it says, Chizkiyahu ben Achaz melech Yehuda, which is pretty wild. There were other seals like that were on the antiquities market, but this was actually discovered in a site, a very logical site right near where the Beit HaMikdash was, the steps going up to the Beit HaMikdash, and it's a beautiful example of Chizkiyahu. Okay, we only have a few minutes, and we have a few important things we have to do. Forgeries. Not everything is real. Sometimes things sound too good to be true, and that's because they're not true. I brought you one example here. This is a tablet that was discovered about 10, 15 years ago. Essentially, it describes the exact story that we have in Sefer Melachim Perek Yud Bet, Melachim Bet Perek Yud Bet, about Yoash, the king of Yehuda, who sees that the Mikdash is not being properly maintained, and therefore he sets up a donation box, right, a pushka, for Bedek HaBayit, so that people will give money so that they'll be able to maintain the Beit HaMikdash. That's exactly what this inscription says, right? I am Yoash, son of Achaziah. I executed the repairs, right? And I made people donate money for the Mikdash. Not everybody agrees, but most scholars agree that this is a very well done forgery. Why do you make a forgery? A lot of reasons, mostly to make money. Sometimes because people want to prove the truth of Tanakh. Sadly, that just goes the other direction, right? It's better to have the real proofs. But there are other forgeries. This is a very famous one, so I brought that one here. 2 last stories, one terrible one and one good one. Lachish. Okay, back to Lachish. Lachish is destroyed by Sancheriv. Okay, huge destruction depicted in famous reliefs that were on the walls of the palace in Nineveh and now are in the British Museum. But it's rebuilt. It's rebuilt, and it lasts for another 100 years until along come the Babylonians, right? And the destruction of all of Malchut Yehuda and the destruction of the temple, and they attack Lachish as well. When Lachish was excavated for the first time in the 1930s, in the walls of the city, in the gate chambers, they discovered more of these astraka, these pieces of pottery, which were letters. And if you look on the last page, skip the pasuk from Yirmiyahu for a minute, they are letters that were written, it seems, to the commander of the fortress in Lachish. And one of these letters says like this, and this is what you have here. And may my Lord be apprised that we are watching for the fire signals of Lachish, according to all the signs which my Lord has given, because we cannot see Azekah. What's going on here? The Babylonian army is advancing, and they're knocking down fortress by fortress by fortress along the borders. And this is written from an unknown place. Benny Begin did a whole study about where it could have been that you could see both Azekah and Lachish. But this fortress is looking out and it's saying, we're looking to you because Azekah has already fallen. And you're the last light still shining. It's a terrifying thing, right? Imagining the lights going out along the border. Now take a look back at the page before. Yirmiyahu is writing about the exact same story at the exact same time. V'chel melech Bavel nilchamim al Yerushalayim v'al kol arei Yehuda hanotarot El Lachish ve'el Azekah ki hine nisharu ba'arei Yehuda arei mivtzar. These are the last places standing, Lachish and Azekah. This is what we're looking at, and we're hopeless. We're wondering what's going to happen. When are the Babylonians going to advance? And the two stories are beautifully parallel. But that's a terrible story to end with, so we're not going to end with that story. And we're going to end with a better story. And that's the last one that you have here. In Bayit Rishon times, Jews, like everybody else, buried with stuff. Okay? People are usually shocked to hear that, but they did. Buried with stuff, pottery and jewelry and money, because you don't know what's going to happen on that journey to the next world. But just like I know that, grave robbers knew that too. And there are very few graves that are intact because people got to them first and took out the stuff. In the late 70s, a very well-known archaeologist named Gabi Bar-Kai was digging in a place called Ketef Hinnom, right above Gei Ben Hinnom in Yerushalayim, right near the Begin Center, if that means anything to you, near the Cinematheque. And he was digging there, and he found graves from the very end of Bayit Rishon, right, from right before the time of the destruction. Fascinating graves, places to lay out the bodies, very interesting, but no finds inside the caves where the bones were eventually put. Now, one day he had kids come to help on the dig, right? School children. And there's that one kid, right? Can't sit still, driving everybody crazy. And he says, you go over there. You dig there. Go play in traffic. Go away. And he continues with his work. And this kid comes back, starts tugging on his shirt. Professor Bar-Kai, I want to show you something. Can I show? What? What do you want to show me? Well, that cave that you told me to dig, it has another little opening at the bottom that leads to another cave that nobody has opened yet. And that cave was full of everything, right? The bones and the pottery and jewelry, everything, right? And that was amazing. The most amazing thing that was discovered there were two tiny little pieces of rolled up silver. Okay, and when they very carefully unrolled them in the lab, on one of them it said like this, and that's what you see here: Yivarecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Hashem panav elecha, v'yasem lecha shalom. Almost the exact language of Birkat Kohanim. This is from 2,600 years ago. It's about 500 years earlier than the earliest piece of Torah we had before that, which is the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's an amazing example of what somebody would be buried with. Why would you be buried with this? Maybe you're a Kohen. More likely it's an amulet. It's protection. The grave is a scary place. Yivarech Hashem v'yishmerecha. Hashem should protect you. Now, just a final coda to that, two final codas to that story. Number one, eventually this was put in the Israel Museum. And a few years later, Gabi Bar-Kai was guiding a group of soldiers in the Israel Museum. And he told the story that I told you. And one of the soldiers raises his hand. He says, that was me. I was a kid, and I heard this from a source that heard it from Professor Barkai, so it's actually a true story. But the even more beautiful coda is that Gabi Barkai was interviewed about this discovery recently, I think for 929, for the Tanakh Study Project. And he wasn't born in Israel. He was born in a DP camp in Hungary, I think, right after the war. And he says his earliest memory of Hebrew is his father blessing him with the Birkat Kohanim. And that's what he remembers, and it's this beautiful closing of the circle when he discovers the Birkat Kohanim in Yerushalayim. So that's just a taste of inscriptions. Thank you, everybody. And happy Yom Ha'atsmaut. Come to Israel. You have a few days.